I died because I prepared a dish. Ha! My name is Peng Fan. I used to live in Foshan, China, where I used to work as a chef at my restaurant. Indo-Chinese spitting cobra soup is considered a rare delicacy in China. I was proud to have this dish featured on my menu. I chopped off the head and cut the cobra into pieces. Then I prepared the soup and cleaned the kitchen. After 20 minutes, when I picked up the snake head to throw it in the bin, it suddenly bit me. I started to suffocate as the neurotoxin, a flesh-eating venom, paralyzed my respiratory system. Restaurant guests could hear screams coming from the kitchen and there were calls for a doctor in the restaurant. Only the anti-venom could have helped me if it was given on time, but unfortunately it was too late for me. I passed away at the hospital. Experts say snakes and other reptiles can still make reactive movements for up to an hour after being killed. It means snakes have the capability of biting and injecting venom even after the head has been severed. That's why the head remained alive and bit me. Therefore in the future everyone needs to be careful, as the cobra meat is not only used as a delicacy and for designer goods, but also Chinese medicine due to the belief that it can help treat various health conditions. This demand has played a role in their vulnerable conservation status. I still can't believe how something I killed me back.
Let's talk about what happened to George Torres and how his girlfriend trapped him inside this suitcase. George Torres was born on February 13th, 1978 to his parents George and Blanca, a couple of brothers, and he was really close to his family. His mother Blanca says that her son was not perfect. I mean, no one is perfect, but she says that her son did make mistakes and, he did do things in life that he regretted. Despite him not being a perfect person, he was still a good son and a lot of people loved him. He had 3 children, and right before his death, he was working at a local hardware store and he was really passionate about this job. In 2017, George met a woman named Sarah Boone. 2 of them met at a bar where they were playing some pool, they hit it off, and then about a year later, they decided to move in together. Now, Sarah is an interesting person. She was born on October 10th, 1977, and just like George, she had previously been married and she also had a child. Sarah's ex-husband is named Brian, and he has come out and spoken about how his relationship was with Sarah. And he says that Sarah was absolutely nuts. She was an alcoholic, and she would go out every single night to different clubs and bars, and she wouldn't come home until 4 o'clock in the morning. She would be doing all of this on school nights while their son was sleeping. She would always choose alcohol before her family, so Brian had enough and he decided to divorce Sarah. He ended up just moving down the street from his house, and they would share custody of their son. Now, when Sarah and George started dating, Brian says that their relationship was not good. He would often have to go to Sarah's apartment to go drop off their son, and anytime he would go there, he would try to avoid Sarah and George because they were always fighting. At one point, Sarah had George arrested around 5 to 6 times for domestic violence, and then another time, both of them were arrested. Kind of had a reoccurring cycle where they would get drunk, they would fight, they would get really toxic, Sarah would call the police, have George arrested, bail him out the next day, and then they would just repeat the cycle. The one time that Sarah and George were both arrested was because they allegedly went to a bar and a man was speaking to Sarah, which made George jealous. When they got to the house, Sarah says that George started dragging her up the stairs and then he punched her in the face. So police were called to the scene, but George had a different story. He says that he wasn't the aggressor, that Sarah was the aggressor, and that she was trying to strangle him, and that the only way she could stop her from doing this was by kicking her. If he hadn't kicked her, then he says that Sarah would have incapacitated him. That's how hard she was strangling him. Police couldn't determine who was the main aggressor, and they ended up arresting both of them. However, the charges against each of them were later dropped because neither one of them wanted to pursue it any further. As you can see, they were both just toxic, and this relationship was not good. Everyone around them said that something bad was bound to happen. February 23rd, 2020, Sarah and George were at their apartment having what they called a good day. They were drinking some wine on the back porch, they had some cigarettes, they did a puzzle together, they painted, and then they decided to play a game of hide and seek. Sarah says that George thought it would be funny if he got inside this suitcase and hid from her. Sarah helped George get inside the suitcase, she zipped it up, not all the way, says that she left a little hole open so that he could stick his fingers in there and unzip himself. Then afterwards, she just went to bed. She figured that he would later unzip himself from the suitcase and then join her. However, the next morning when she woke up, she realized that George was still inside the suitcase and that he wasn't breathing. Okay, go to part 2. Part 2 on what happened to George Torres and how his girlfriend trapped him inside the suitcase. Sarah wakes up and she realizes that George is still inside the suitcase and that he's no longer breathing. Instead of calling 911 immediately, she decides to call her ex-husband Brian. She tells Brian what happened and she tells him to come over, but Brian is like, okay, I'll go over, but you have to call 911 right now. Brian arrives to the house a few minutes later. He asks Sarah, did you call 911 yet? And she says no. Brian is like, okay, you need to call them right now, and that's when Sarah finally decides to call 911 and report George's death. Police arrive at the scene and they start asking Sarah about what happened. She kept saying that this was just an accident, and then she kept asking to go inside and grab her Dr. Pepper. She said that she was really thirsty and that she had really bad cotton mouth, and she kept telling the officer, "Can I go in there and get my Dr. Pepper, please?" The officer was like, "No, you cannot go in there because it's literally a crime scene." But Sarah would not stop asking the officer if she could go in there to grab her Dr. Pepper. Eventually, she got so thirsty that she literally leaned over and started drinking the water from the outdoor faucet. After that, she went back to one of the officers and asked them if they could go to the back porch and grab her cigarette. Yeah, she literally asked a police officer if they could give her a cigarette. The officer, of course, said no because you can't go inside a crime scene, and this just kind of went on for about like 40 minutes. Sarah just wouldn't sit still, and the officers just kept telling her to just remain calm because they were trying to figure out, what happened to George. An autopsy was conducted on George, and it revealed some very disturbing details. George had a laceration on his lip, he had bruising around his eye, he had scratches on his back, among other injuries. The medical examiner says that these injuries were recent. Also determined that George died of positional asphyxia with environmental suffocation consistent with prolonged confinement. They believe that George was inside that suitcase for 11 hours or more. At first, police were thinking, maybe this was an accident. Maybe they were playing hide and seek and then things just ended badly. However, after learning what the autopsy concluded, they realized that maybe this wasn't an accident. And then when they looked through Sarah's phone, they found some more disturbing evidence. The night of George's death, Sarah had recorded 2 videos. In this video, you can see George inside the suitcase asking Sarah to let him out. He keeps telling Sarah that he can't breathe and that he wants to get out of here, but Sarah just ignores him and laughs at him. George tells her, "Sarah, I can't breathe," and Sarah says, "Yeah, that's how I feel when you choke me." Then just keeps saying, "Sarah?" and Sarah says, "Yeah, that's my name, don't wear it out." So he was literally asking Sarah to let him out and told her that he couldn't breathe, but Sarah just ignored him. Police look at these videos on the phone and they realize that this wasn't an accident. It's not like Sarah did fall asleep and just assumed that George was okay. She literally recorded herself mocking George and just watching him suffer slowly. Detectives show Sarah this video and she just says that it was a joke. However, police tell her it's not a joke. You literally let this man suffer to death. In the end, they arrested Sarah Boone and charged her with second-degree murder for the death of her boyfriend, George Torres. Sarah claims that she's innocent and her trial has been set for July 24th, so we will see what happens. My thoughts and prayers go out to George's family. Even though he wasn't a perfect person, he still didn't deserve this. No one deserves to die in a tiny suitcase suffocating to death, so I hope he gets justice.
Cannibal facts that'll eat at you for days. In 2008, Joe Matheny was sentenced to death after murdering 8 people, turning their meat into hamburgers, and selling them to unsuspecting customers. This photo shows the survivors of the 1972 Andes plane crash. The passengers resorted to cannibalism to survive 72 days in the snow. If you look closely at the ground, you'll see a human spine picked clean next to the guy on the right. In 1928, Albert Fish met up with his friend with the intention of killing and eating him. However, when he was introduced to the guy's 10-year-old sister Grace, he decided to eat her instead. After, he sent a letter to their parents saying that she tasted sweet and tender. In 2008, a man on a packed Greyhound bus named Vince Lee killed and beheaded another 22-year-old passenger. He proceeded to dismember and eat his body in front of the other people on the bus. In 2001, a man named Armin Maiwis posted an ad on a website called Cannibal Cafe looking for someone to be killed and eaten. A German engineer named Bernd Brandis volunteered, and after photos and videos of the incident were posted online, Armin was sent to jail, where today, he's a vegetarian. Throughout the 1950s in Southern California, there's a surge of young women called starlets who move to Hollywood in search of stardom. They want to become actresses and models and will do whatever it takes to solidify themselves as a true celebrity. However, this journey isn't easy, and many of these women are forced to take several odd jobs like questionable photography shoots, and you can guess that when you go into this line of work, you encounter several dangerous individuals along the way. This series of photographs are the work of photographer Harvey Glattman, later dubbed the Glamour Girl Slayer. October 10th, 1927. Harvey's born in the Bronx to a Jewish family, and they later decide to move to Denver, Colorado. As a young kid, he exhibits various behaviors that many would consider to be antisocial, and his parents often catch him experimenting sexually. See, all his life he's been involved with the Boy Scouts, and it's there that he develops an obsession with rope. This builds more and more until one day, at just 12 years old, Harvey's mother walks in on him in the bathroom pleasuring himself with a rope tied tightly around his neck. His parents find this unusual, concerning even, so they go to their physician and ask if it's normal, and he basically says, yeah, he's just a kid, he'll get over it eventually. However, as Harvey grows older, these sadomasochistic behaviors get worse, with him getting more sexual gratification from inflicting pain on others. In 1957, Harvey decides to move to LA, where he wants to pursue photography and supports this dream working on the side as a TV repairman. He joins a photography club and finds that many women there are willing to do freelance photography shoots in order to support their dreams of modeling or becoming actresses. On August 1st, 1957, one of these women, 19-year-old Judy Ann Dole, agrees to do a photo shoot with Harvey for just $20. This is actually pretty good money at the time, and Harvey seems nice enough. He's actually a bit of a nerd to Judy with these really thick black glasses and his pointy ears. Harvey then invites Judy over to his apartment where he tells her that these photos are for a detective magazine, so they're gonna need to do some shots where she's bound and gagged. Judy really needs the money, and she hasn't done a lot of photography shoots in the past, so she willingly lets Harvey tie a rope around her wrists, knees, and ankles and gag her. But this just isn't enough for Harvey. He then pulls out a gun, telling Judy it's not real, and says that he wants to point it at her so he can get the shot that he really wants. You can see from the photos that she isn't quite terrified, but does still look uncomfortable given that she's putting herself in this vulnerable of a situation. He then proceeds to assault her, taking pictures as he does it, and Harvey Glattman loses his virginity at the age of 29. After he's done, he forces Judy to cuddle with him on the couch and watch TV for several hours. Eventually, she requests to use the bathroom, promising that she's not going to try and escape, and it's at this moment Harvey realizes she must die. He then proceeds to tie her up, throw her in his car, and drive to an isolated desert in San Bernardino Valley. And when they get there, Harvey ties a rope around Judy's neck until she can't breathe anymore and buries her body in the sand. The sheriff's department proceeds to put out wanted listings for the killing, and Harvey fears that the other models in Los Angeles have seen it, so he thinks of a new plan to pursue his victims. He decides to join what's called a Lonely Hearts Club. If you've never heard of one of these before, it's basically like Tinder, but in real life. Single men and women would go to a club to meet one another, and one of these individuals is 24-year-old Shirley Ann Bridgeford. On March 9th, 1958, her and Harvey meet, and it's there that they decide to go out dancing. However, a few minutes into the drive, Shirley quickly notices that they're not going in the right direction, and within a few hours, she's tied up, photographed, and assaulted numerous times by Harvey before he takes her into the desert and kills her. In October 1958, 28-year-old Lorraine Vigil answers one of Harvey's ads in the newspaper and agrees to do a modeling gig for him. Things seem to be fairly normal at first, but as Lorraine is sitting in his car, she notices that they're heading in the opposite direction of Hollywood and are taking an exit to actually leave the city. She starts asking over and over again, what are we doing? Where are we going? Until Harvey eventually pulls off to the side of the road, saying that they have a flat tire. He acts like he's getting out of the car to go fix it, but instead pulls out a gun, pointing it directly at Lorraine. She panics, quickly grabs the barrel, and starts fighting back, something Harvey is not used to, making him quite nervous. He tells her that if she just does what he says, he's not going to hurt her, but Lorraine holds on for dear life until all of a sudden, the gun goes off. The bullet scrapes past her leg, but Lorraine powers through, bites Harvey's wrist, takes the gun, and points it right at him. And it's at this time that a highway patrol officer pulls right past them. The man gets out of his car, assumes the two are a couple, and Lorraine is physically assaulting Harvey. However, as he gets closer, he quickly realizes that this is definitely not the case and immediately takes the two into custody. There he confesses to 3 murders and leads the police to a toolbox that contains various photographs of his victims. In 1958, Harvey Glattman is sentenced on 2 counts of first-degree murder, and the following year is executed in a gas chamber.
A 7-year-old girl was lured into a public restroom, and what followed was unimaginable horror. Hello, true crimers. This is the case of Sharice Iverson. Viewer discretion is advised. Sharice was born on October 20th, 1989 in Los Angeles, California. Unfortunately, she only got to live for 7 years, so there is not much of a backstory on her. It was Memorial Day weekend, May 25th, 1997, in Primm, Nevada. Charisse and her family were there on vacation. At approximately 3:30 a.m. at the Prima Donna Resort, Charisse was basically left on her own while her father was upstairs gambling. Charisse would be caught on CCTV as she was kind of roaming around the arcade, and there were several other people there as well. Sometime shortly after 4 a.m., Charisse's body was discovered in the women's restroom. Someone had tried to shove her in the toilet, and it appeared that someone had also sexually assaulted her. Once police had the CCTV footage, they found something kind of disturbing. A younger white male was walking around the arcade at one point with a friend. But then this footage picks him up playing with what appears to be the 7-year-old girl, Charisse Iverson. He's kind of following her around at different arcade machines, and then at one point they're playing hide and go seek. Police would later find more footage of this man outside the hotel, and a few days later they were able to discover who it was. It was an 18-year-old man named Jeremy Strohmeyer. He had been in Primm, Nevada with a friend and his family. They were visiting from Long Beach, California. He was actually arrested in Long Beach, and this was because police had been sharing images of this man at the casino who was just wanted for questioning, and his own friends and family recognized him, so they turned him in. So he was extradited back to Las Vegas. Jeremy was adopted by a very wealthy family when he was really, really young. And from there, he led a very, very privileged life. He basically got anything he wanted. He even had his own private jet. When he was shown the CCTV footage and presented with, evidence, he just basically confessed. And I do want to give you a bit of a trigger warning because what I'm about to tell you is extremely disturbing. Jeremy and his 17-year-old friend David Cash were roaming the arcade. Charisse had this wadded up paper towel that she was throwing, and it accidentally hit Jeremy. Jeremy decided to take this opportunity to play with her and play hide and go seek around the arcade. He tells police that at that point he said the safest and best place for you to hide Charisse would be in the women's restroom. And she took his advice and she went into the women's restroom. Jeremy and his friend David then proceeded to go into the women's restroom shortly after her. All of that of them all walking into the restroom was caught on camera. He says they played for a few minutes, and then he suddenly put his hand around her mouth and dragged her into the handicap stall. David Cash went into the stall opposite and was kind of looking over. He said at that point she was struggling, trying to scream, and she was flailing about when two women came into the restroom, and he made sure that she was quiet. And both men kind of hid. After the women left the restroom, Jeremy, he began to, he said, fondle the little girl because he was attracted to her. And then he sexually assaulted her. And then at one point, his friend just leaves the restroom. But then Jeremy decides, well, this little girl knows what I look like and what I just did to her, so now she needs to be silent. He says he strangled her for a few minutes, but she kind of slipped in and out of consciousness but didn't die. He then says he took his hand underneath her chin and another hand behind her head and snapped her neck, he said, like he had seen in the movies. It still didn't work. She was still alive and still flailing. So then he grabbed her again in the same way and he snapped her neck a second time. Then he says he realized she was dead. He folded her body in half and tried to shove her in the toilet. And then he just calmly walked out 20 minutes later and went about his business. And the camera picks him up acting completely normal, like nothing happened. During Jeremy's confession, the detective said he was just totally calm, cool, and collected, like it was nothing. They asked him, did you at any point try to give her CPR to maybe, reverse what you did after he strangled her? He said, no, I just knew I had to kill her, so I killed her. During their investigation, they found out that all of the girlfriends he had in the past, he tried to make them dress up like little girls. When all of this came about, his adopted parents found out that his birth parents both struggled with severe mental health issues, but the adoption agency never foreclosed that information. So his adopted parents would later sue the system. And this whole thing actually ended up changing adoption laws, at least in California, where now all of that information about the parents has to be disclosed. Prosecutors would seek the death penalty for Jeremy, but he would eventually just plead guilty so that he didn't get the death penalty. And he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His friend David Cash was never prosecuted. David Cash even told a newspaper that he didn't dwell on the murder. He said, quote, "I'm not going to get upset over somebody else's life. I just worry about myself first. I'm not going to lose sleep over somebody else's problems," end quote. He later said, "I don't feel remorse because I didn't know her." He would only be labeled as the Bad Samaritan, but he got off scot-free. That later led to bills in Nevada that required people to report crimes. Her father also wasn't punished, even though he was told not to leave her alone.
Breaking news, Richard Allen has confessed to taking the life of Abby and Libby. According to the Carroll County prosecutor, Richard Allen has made, quote, admissions of guilt. He has also made these confessions to more than one person. The prosecutor said, quote, he made multiple confessions to multiple people. His own attorney acknowledged the confession, saying that he had made, quote, incriminating statements while at the facility. He also stated that those claims should not be trusted due to his client's mental state. He said, quote, confessions, non-confessions, incriminating statements, non-incriminating statements, we'll deal with that. The jury will hear all of that. Yesterday's hearing was mainly focused on if he should be moved to a different facility. His trial date is set for early January 2024. I'll keep you guys updated. What do you think? Drop in the comments.
Prairie View A&M student is dead and 3 other people are hurt after a shooting at an apartment complex right near campus.
Police are calling this a domestic disturbance at off-campus housing, and there are a lot of moving pieces to this at this hour. Reporter Micah Hatfield is live in Prairie View. She's breaking down all of this for us and just spoke with one of the victims. Micah?
Hey, good afternoon, guys. Like you said, a lot of moving parts here, but it's a very sad situation. A woman lost her life trying to help her friend get out of a physical fight with her boyfriend.
Dead for no apparent reason. She's a hero.
Prairie View police say this morning that a dating couple got into an argument at one of their apartments. Somehow, they ended up at the gates at Prairie View Apartments on Elm Street. They were arguing in the parking lot and things became physical. According to police, that woman's friend who lived at the complex tried to help her. She got her boyfriend, who's a security guard, and he tried to help as well. The 2 men were talking, according to police, and things escalated. The original man in the fight with his girlfriend pulled out a gun and shot the friend's boyfriend. He then returned fire and hit that original man in the chest. Stray bullets hit the friend and killed her. Another person was struck as well. Police say the original couple left together and ended up at Buc-ee's on 290 about 8 miles away. They called for help and that man was taken to the hospital. The friend's boyfriend was hit and was also taken to the hospital but has since been released.
I'm tired of seeing it. I'm really tired of seeing it. It don't make sense. We keep shooting and killing our children and killing our young women.
And like you can see, a lot of moving parts here. No one has been identified by police, and we are unsure who that 4th person was who was hit by gunfire. No arrests have been made in this case. Prairie View police say they're still trying to get to the bottom of who fired first and exactly what happened before they proceed with any arrests.
What? What's wrong with you? Then why